What kind of person demands you tear down your home in 48 hours? The kind who thinks they own the world. Karen stormed onto my property that sweltering August morning, her voice slicing through the quiet like a chainsaw. I was sanding a cedar plank on my porch, the scent of wood shavings curling in the air, when her shadow fell over me. She didn't knock, didn't wave, just stood there, hands on her hips, her floral dress straining at the seams, and barked. This eyesore's got 48 hours. Tom, tear it down, or we will. She thrust a crumpled HOA notice at me, her manicured nails flashing like tiny daggers. My cabin, my sanctuary for 15 years, was apparently non-compliant with the Willow Creek Homeowners Association's new aesthetic code. I looked at her, then at the paper, my hands steady despite the fire in my chest. You're on my land, Karen, I said quietly. She smirked, her eyes glinting with the kind of glee you see in someone who loves power too much. Not for long. She snapped, turning on her heel, her two HOA lackeys trailing behind her like nervous dogs. I stood there, the notice trembling in the breeze, knowing this wasn't just about a cabin. This was about control. My cabin wasn't much to look at. Rough logs, a slanted roof, windows I'd patched with duct tape after last winter's storm. But it was mine. Built it with my own hands after Sarah left, when I needed something to pour my grief into. Every nail, every beam, held a piece of me. The HOA, led by Karen, had been sniffing around for years. Ever since Willow Creek turned from a sleepy cluster of homes into a gated paradise for people who cared more about curb appeal than community. I'd ignored their letters, their fines, their polite requests to modernize. But this was war. I sat on the porch that night, the crickets humming, and read the notice again. Demolition order, 48 hours. My blood boiled, but I didn't panic. I'd learned long ago that panic drowns reason. Instead, I pulled out a dusty box from under my bed, one I hadn't touched in years. Inside were the original deeds to my land, yellowed and creased, but clear as day. And there, buried in the fine print, was something Karen didn't know. The next morning, I walked into the HOA office, a sterile room that smelled of lemon cleaner and bureaucracy. Karen sat behind a desk, her lips pursed like she'd already won. Her two board members, Phil and Marjorie, flanked her, their faces pinched with the kind of discomfort you get when you know you're backing a bully. I didn't sit. I just slid the deed across the desk. You might want to read this, I said. Karen snorted, barely glancing at it. What's this? Tom. Another sob story. I didn't answer. I just waited. Phil, the quieter of the two, picked it up, his eyes scanning the page. His face paled. Karen, he whispered. This says his land isn't part of the HOA. Her head snapped up, her smirk vanishing. What? She snatched the deed, her eyes darting over the words. I watched the realization hit her like a slap. My 5 acres, deeded in 1963, predated the HOA's formation. I wasn't under their jurisdiction. Never had been. But that wasn't the twist. The real shock came when Phil kept reading. There's more, he said, his voice shaky. His family, they own the access road. The only road into Willow Creek. Karen's face froze. I leaned forward, my voice low. That's right. My grandfather bought that strip in '58. Every car, every delivery truck, every landscaper you love so much they drive on my road. I pulled out another document, A lease agreement I drafted with a lawyer friend the night before. I've been letting the HOA use it for free, out of neighborly spirit. But if you're coming for my home, I'm done playing nice. Sign this, or I close the road. The lease demanded triple the rent they'd never paid. Retroactive for 5 years. Karen's mouth opened, then closed, like a fish gasping for air. Marjorie looked like she might faint. I'd turned their power grab into a checkmate. The room felt like it was holding its breath. Karen's eyes burned into me, but I didn't flinch. I'd spent years keeping my head down, letting their petty rules slide. But this was different. This was my life, my home, my history. You wouldn't dare, she hissed. Try me, I said. Phil was still staring at the deed, muttering about legal ramifications. Marjorie started babbling about community harmony, but Karen cut her off. This is blackmail, she shouted, slamming her fist on the desk. I didn't blink. No, Karen. This is leverage. I slid the pen toward her. The air was thick, the kind of tension that makes your skin prickle. I could see her calculating, her mind racing for a way out. But there wasn't one. Not this time. Then came the twist I didn't see coming. Phil cleared his throat, his voice barely above a whisper. Tom, there's something you should know. He hesitated, glancing at Karen, who shot him a look that could have melted steel. The HOA, we're broke. The reserve fund's been mismanaged. If you enforce this lease, we can't pay it. The whole community could collapse. I froze. I'd come here to fight for my cabin, not to bankrupt my neighbors. Most of them were just regular folks' families. Retirees. People who didn't deserve to be caught in Karen's crossfire. I looked at her, saw the flicker of fear behind her bravado. For the first time, she wasn't in control, and she hated it. Part of me wanted to push harder, to make her squirm. But another part, the part that still remembered what community meant, hesitated. I'd won. But at what cost? The standoff stretched on. The silence in the HOA office so heavy it felt like it could crush us all. Karen's face was a mask of fury, but her hands trembled as she clutched the lease. I stood there, my heart pounding, torn between rage and reason. I'd come to save my cabin, not destroy a community. But Karen's arrogance, her relentless need to control, had pushed me to this edge. I thought of my neighbor's Mrs. Larson, who brought me soup when I was sick. The Garcias, whose kids played in my yard. They didn't deserve to suffer for her mistakes. Give me one reason, I said, my voice steady. Why I shouldn't sign this and let you deal with the fallout. Karen's eyes narrowed. But before she could speak, Phil stepped forward, his voice urgent. Because it's not just about you or her. It's about all of us. He was right, and I hated it. The confrontation exploded that afternoon in front of my cabin. Word had spread, and a small crowd gathered, neighbors. Some curious, some angry. Karen, never one to miss a stage, stood on my lawn, rallying her supporters. This man's holding our community hostage, she shouted, pointing at me like I was a criminal. Her voice was shrill, her face red, but I saw the cracks in her armor. The crowd murmured, uncertain. I stepped onto my porch, the lease in one hand, the deed in the other. This isn't about me, I said, loud enough for everyone to hear. It's about her trying to bully me out of my home, my land, my rights. I held up the deed. And this says I own the road you all drive on. I never wanted to use it against you, but she's left me no choice. The crowd went quiet. Karen's mouth twisted, but she didn't have a comeback. Not yet. Then Mrs. Larson, frail and leaning on her cane, stepped forward. Tom's been here longer than any of us, she said, her voice trembling but firm. He's never caused trouble. Why are we fighting him? The crowd shifted, murmurs turning to whispers of agreement. Karen's face darkened. She rounded on Mrs. Larson, her voice dripping venom. Stay out of this. Ellen, you don't know what's at stake. But Mrs. Larson didn't back down. I know a bully when I see one, she said. The crowd erupted. Some cheering, some shouting at Karen. It was chaos, and for a moment, I thought it might turn physical. I stepped between them, raising my hands. Enough, I shouted. This ends now. Karen's empire crumbled in the days that followed. The HOA board called an emergency meeting, and the truth spilled out like a burst dam. Karen had been skimming the reserve fund for years, funneling money into pet projects' fancy fountains, her own landscaping. The community was on the brink of insolvency, and my least demand had exposed it. Neighbors turned on her, demanding audits, resignations. Karen tried to fight back, blaming me, the economy, anyone but herself. But the evidence was undeniable. Phil and Marjorie, desperate to save face, voted her out as president. She stood in the meeting room, her face ashen, as the gavel fell. I wasn't there. I didn't need to be. I'd already won. I could have signed the lease, tripled their rent, and walked away. But that night, sitting on my porch, the stars bright above my cabin, I thought about what really mattered. I'd fought for my home, but I didn't want to tear down theirs. The next morning, I met with the new board. I tore up the lease. Keep the road open, I said. No rent. Just leave my cabin alone. Phil shook my hand, tears in his eyes. Marjorie promised a new HOA, one that listened. I didn't trust them completely, but it was a start. The community began to heal. Neighbors talking again, sharing stories instead of accusations. Mrs. Larson brought me soup again, her smile warmer than ever. Looking back, I realized the fight wasn't just about a cabin or a road. It was about standing up, about refusing to let someone else define your worth. Karen thought she could control me, control us all. But she forgot one thing. A community isn't built on rules or power. It's built on people who care enough to fight for each other. I kept my cabin, my sanctuary, but I gained something more, a reminder that one signature, one stand, can change everything. And as I sanded another cedar plank under the morning sun, I felt lighter than I had in years. The world didn't belong to people like Karen. It belonged to those who dared to hold their ground.